any further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Stephen Amico, who will present Gender, Sex, Polyphonic Embodiment, coming to us from the Greek Academy at the University of Bergen. So welcome, Professor Amico.
All right, so my present exploration began with an experience. Having just attended the second concert by Russian pop superstar Valeriia, 2 consecutive nights in 2 different cities, I found myself on a bus filled with other concert goers, most of them women, all of the voices Russian. Valeriia's songs still in my head, many of which I had known for years, as well as the voices on the bus, somehow emplaced me somatically into a comforting Russian space, allowing me to shed the anxiety engendered by an exhausting travel schedule. Here is inside the concert hall, which is an I note that I felt at home in Russia because I've lived there and I've frequently travel there, so I feel this sense of at home when I'm there. So on the bus, surrounded by all of these Russian voices. And yet, objectively, I wasn't in Russia at all, but I was in Estonia, a country where I was constantly confronted with the complexities of memory, history, and cultural affiliation, manifest in registers ranging from the linguistic to the architectural. My reflections upon this experience, as well as the theoretical insights of the numerous authors and texts in which I have lately been immersed, lead me to offer 4 preliminary posits which I find central to a phenomenological understanding of experience. First of all, our connection to the world is never simply a matter of taking in sense data, what Alfred North Whitehead would call presentational immediacy, but always engenders memory and imagination as well. Indeed, as Arnold Modell notes, human consciousness itself is marked by a bootstrapping capability, resulting in a virtual reality which is no less real than that which is putatively objective. Secondly, experience cannot be adequately understood, despite our academic mania for text, as a linear process. It is rather repetitive, recursive, marked by retentions and protensions. As Husserl has noted, the subject's apodictic certainty, for example, only comes from recollection of a past in the present, troubling strict demarcations of temporal locations. Third, perception and experience are marked by an indeterminateness. From Husserl's discussion of adumbrations to Merleau-Ponty's highlighting of ambiguity related to both objects and selves, we see that undecidability signals not an error in perception, but, as Sylvia Stoller notes, its very ontology. And fourth, and finally, experience cannot be understood, and I will not argue this, without attention to the embodied nature of the human subject. At the risk of disciplinary chauvinism, I do want to suggest that it is musical product, process, and practice, rather than some sort of generic quotidian experience, which indeed offers the richest possibilities of exploring the complexity of embodied subjectivity, insofar as all 4 of these foundational dynamics are essential to any sort of musical communication or reception. Moreover, as I will discuss a bit later, there are 2 additional dynamics with which we are confronted in our relationship to the musical, dynamics which are unfortunately often elided in theoretical literatures, but of great importance in understanding both subjective and intersubjective connections to the world. Now, insofar as my inquiry engages, as you've seen, gender and sex, it's possible that my short introduction via these general posits may seem to confirm the suspicions of some feminist scholars regarding the fundamental incompatibility of phenomenological theory with feminist inquiry, including the extent to which the body, which is, for example, so central to Merleau-Ponty's work, is presumed to be universal, that not only elides gender difference, but undergirds, in fact, a masculinist worldview. I'm going to shortly argue that a phenomenological exploration and indeed a fearless acceptance of sexed bodies offers rich possibilities of theorizing beyond gender binarization and sexual dimorphism. And in order to reach this point, I'm going to return now to the singer Valeriia, an artist whose work and life offer myriad opportunities to explore gender discourses outside of the Anglophone West. In my current book project, which I have sort of tentatively entitled Femina Postsovietica, Women Voice Russian Popular Music, I devote the bulk of an entire chapter to Valeriia, focusing on her biographical narrative, in many ways manifest in her work, as a woman who survived an abusive relationship with former husband and manager Alexander Shurgin, and who professionally and physically reinvented herself as, there she is before, and reinvented herself as, one might say, the quintessential beautiful Russian pop superstar, or the new post-Soviet woman. Valeriia's Orthodox Christian, sorry, it's a little bit wonky here, her Orthodox Christian faith, her support of Vladimir Putin, her devotion to her family and her children, her success as a singer and as a businesswoman, her support of health and fitness, as well as her escape from physical and emotional abuse, certainly resonate with many Russian women on symbolic levels. And in this chapter, in the book, not this chapter I'm writing for the book here, in the chapter in my book, I read her metamorphosis via the Christian philosophy of Pavel Florensky, highlighting the connections among beauty, divinity, and salvation. But I want to move someplace else than gender, and in order to do this, I'm going to play a couple of short excerpts from one of her most recent songs, which she sang at both of her concerts, called Silnie Zhenshini, which means strong women. And it's clear that we can engage this video and song at the level of gender. I'm not going to play the whole thing because there's not time, but I'll just play the chorus. So she's saying, strong women also cry. If the tears aren't visible, it doesn't mean it.
Сильные женщины тоже плачут, если слез не видно, это ничего не значит. Тоже плачут, просто слезы, эти слезы хранят внутри. Тоже плачут, просто слезы, эти слезы хранят внутри.
And now the end.
Не видно, это ничего не значит. Сильные женщины тоже плачут, если слез не видно, это ничего не значит. Сильные женщины тоже плачут, если слез не видно, это ничего не значит.
Now, with reference to these final images, which I think are sort of heavy-handedly obvious, and drawing upon the work of feminist and literary theorist Toril Moi, I want to suggest that while attention to gender is certainly important in uncovering coercive and asymmetrical social structures and of great use in all sorts of critical and political projects, it is a phenomenological engagement of sex, that is, the sexed body, that may actually offer additional possibilities in terms of understanding subjective and intersubjective experience. According to Moi, theories of gender have not only highlighted its constructed nature, but moreover have moved to actually erase the body by asserting its constructed nature as well. And in Moi's view, such a move, which eradicates, according to her, a loving, dying, suffering body, can only but eviscerate any understanding of lived subjectivity. In light of this, and with reference to the importance of proprioception, I suggest that it is indeed at the level of the body that women in Valeriia's audiences may connect with the singer, her sounds, and her texts. Her pregnancies, her maternalness, her eroticized and sensualized body, and her body in pain. These are all stills from her various videos. But we need not think of these bodies only as women, although we do not want to think of them as women. And in this regard, while both Sylvia Staller and Sarah Heinemann suggest that the surplus of experience, this undecidability, leads to possibilities of limitless genders or styles of gender, I would argue that it is in fact not attention to limitless genders which may be productive for a focus for phenomenological intervention, but rather limitless or rather new types of bodies. For one example, with reference to Barbara Montero's posit that the aesthetic, the sounds, the movements, may be implicated in the creation of a proprioceptive intersubjectivity, I want to return to the two supplements to which I alluded earlier, the supplements to my original four, both of which will highlight the importance of attention to music in seeking to understand the embodied subjectivity and the possibility of multiplicity or surplus. And I'm thinking specifically of affect and indeed the aesthetic. Now, owing to time constraints, I can only briefly make reference to Michael Dufresne's Phenomenology of Aesthetic Experience, which, while problematic in some ways, nonetheless suggests numerous productive avenues for a phenomenological understanding of a lived, embodied subjectivity, which might, as he says, escape the realm of necessity, including the necessity of a foundational gendered binary. I simply want to note here Dufresne's connection that via our engagement with the, as he calls it, the aesthetic object, or as he also calls it, the apotheosis of the sensuous, we do come close to experiencing being in its essence. Moreover, in my reading of his work, I see his positing of something he calls an affective a priori as suggesting limitless affective registers resistant to exhaustion by word or concept, and via the sensuous plenitude of the aesthetic, we are pulled toward, or there is an awakening of, inarticulable yet experiential ways of being embodied in the world previously unknown. If we furthermore conceive of this inexhaustibility not as surplus, a word which has connotations, but as the potentiator of desire, desire as the fundamental motivation of being, as René Barbares suggests, we begin to understand the indissoluble links among embodiment, music, the aesthetic, and subjectivity. The word desire reminds us that sexed, sexual, and sensual bodies cannot be erased, something that, unfortunately, in my opinion, appears to be the case in much cultural analysis, indeed obsessed, with the assumed omnipotence of the ideological. In order to give an idea of this idea of sexed bodies, I'm going to show a couple of videos taken from Valeriia's concert in Tallinn. And this is, the first video is taken when they're calling people back from intermission, take your seats, in Russian, of course, because everyone there's and you'll see Valeriia. And you're on a women who are sitting in front of you. 3, 4. Yeah. In this video, I think it's arguable, and it seems like sort of superficial, but I don't think it is superficial at all. I think it's arguable that the link between singer and listener is made manifest at the level of the body, the ways in which a woman's body is groomed, clothed, presented, is shared at the level of both style and comportment. The female body is here one that I would say is in common, yet it's also notable that Valeriia, this is all her, has constantly changed her physical style as much as her musical style, the way she presents herself as woman. And I would argue that no one who has an experience of and with the aesthetic, the affective, will leave this experience understanding her or his embodied being in exactly the same way, including at the level of what she or he might understand as gender or sex. Even further, in this next video, there's a gesture towards something altogether different and I think complex, although it might seem superficial, I hope not, with both male and female taking part in physical movements shared among all three, corporeal movement in common. So this is at the end of the concert. She asked everyone who was sitting in the front to come up and be close to her on the stage. Singing along, so sharing an actual physical. So you have three people moving with something as intimate as the mouth, sharing its corporeality in this moment, in the realm of the affective aesthetic. The video suggests ways of approaching body that do not take as eternally foundational the differentiation between body with penis and body with vagina. And taking a cue from the relatively new field of fat studies, it seems to me that perhaps in ways similar to our willingness to accept or even require myriad genres and subgenres of musical style in order to do justice to diversity, we might begin by close engagement with people's embodied relationships to and networks surrounding aesthetic practice to see all sorts of ways that bodies might be in common. Fat bodies or fast bodies, bodies in pain or eroticized bodies, aging bodies or languid bodies, and numerous other types of bodies that have not yet even been conceptualized. Understanding the perhaps countless variables that contribute to the formation of but one subjectivity, it is not, in my opinion, a contradiction to accept the existence of male and female bodies and concurrently to suggest that the embodied experiences that are essential to each human being's connection to the world may lie in a type of body beyond this dimorphism. Bodies often experienced in the realm of the aesthetic, or to use Richard Schusterman's term, in somaesthetic practice. In Simone de Beauvoir's estimation, a woman's body does exist, but not at the level of destiny. In closing, I'm going to suggest here conceptualizing this complexity as what I'm calling a polyphonic embodiment, a term that, via the de facto suggestion of the musical, not only highlights those foundational dynamics I've been discussing, but also avoids a continuation of the hypertrophy of the visual and ideological by highlighting the importance of the vibrational and immersive at the level of experience. In this regard, one may at the very same time be in and experience Estonia as well as Russia and feel corporally connected to both. May be biologically male, but resonating, reverberating with the sonically apprehended biological female, and may share and make social space subjectively and intersubjectively with hundreds of strangers via an aesthetic proprioception. And although I'm not sure yet what to call it, I'm convinced that each person does possess, at the level of experience, a type of synthesizing center, so that one's multiplicity need not suggest a diffusion into pathology or non-being. We might conceive of such a center as sonic in nature, capable of exerting an organizing vibrational force, yet at the same time capacious and diffuse enough to allow for a potentially unlimited number of voices to be constitutional parts of the whole. I'm going to go 1 minute over if that's okay. Okay, so I was planning on closing, if you read my paper, with a discussion of screens, technologies, and post-phenomenologies, but serendipitously, I came upon something which I hope you'll indulge me, that I'm going to go off the script of Valeriia and Russia and Estonia, because it's related to something, a project I'm trying to get going about music, fashion, and phenomenological intervention, and I think it really fits in here. It's the runway show from Tom Brown's Spring-Summer 2018 collection, and I will just get this going while I'm talking. And I'll let it go. So, I imagine the first word that might come up in people's mind is gender, followed by masculinity or femininity. But I would like to use these bodies as living examples of potentials. They may indeed all be men, but how do their sartorial coverings or revealings allow us to conceive of these bodies in new and productive ways? Phenomenological inquiry offers the possibility of exploring not only what types of bodies might be implicated in the aesthetic experiences and being with the world, but also an understanding of how these bodies experience. We can perhaps here try to bracket out a natural attitude that in all instances it is the gendered body that matters, and explore the possibilities of what Merleau-Ponty described as our many natural selves. And by doing so, we can open the doors to all sorts of different and ever-changing, never final, never linearly progressing bodies that, in Gal Rubin's seminal utopian formulations, might exist without gender at all. I got a slide that says thank you. Thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you.